This episode is brought to you by the Arvada Center. Relax under the stars at the Arvada Center's outdoor amphitheater with their summer concert series running now through September. This season features big names like Melissa Etheridge, Tower of Power, Preservation Hall Jazz Band, Spin Doctors, and so much more. Prime MTV. Cracker, Spin Doctors. You know what? Melissa Etheridge was in there too. She doesn't get enough credit. Actually, I'm going to go to that show too. Put that on my calendar. For tickets and a full schedule of live concerts, visit arvadacenter.org. That's arvadacenter.org. Today on CityCast Denver. Ballots go out this week and the primaries are heating up. From fundraising disparities to majority leaders seemingly wanting to oust their own colleagues, we've got our eye on some contentious races. Colorado Politics State House reporter Marianne Goodland joins me to explain it all. Today is Monday, June 3rd. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Marianne Goodland, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be back.
So there's some big and interesting primary races happening right now, and ballots go out this week. So we wanted to talk to you, one of our fave political reporters, about the races to watch, and then some other questions about these interesting trends we're seeing in these primaries. But let's just start with House District 4, which I have to say is probably one of the most interesting to watch, especially for folks in Denver. I have to say this is my district. So this is incumbent Tim Hernandez versus Cecilia Espinoza. Before we get started, can you explain how Tim Hernandez was elected to this seat last year?
Yes. Well, he actually wasn't elected. Technically, he has never appeared on the ballot until now. So there was a vacancy committee that was created when Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez, who represented that Northwest and Western Denver district, she was elected to Denver City Council. So this became one of the 29 lawmakers who have gained their seats through a vacancy committee and not by the vote of the electorate. And so Hernandez faced off against Cecilia Espinoza for that vacancy, and he won that pretty handily. And so he is now running to be elected, his first election to the seat, and his opponent is Cecilia Espinoza. And she is a retired appellate judge. There's been some controversy about her being in this race, but of course there's been a lot of controversy about him too. So they are facing off. She actually holds a pretty substantial advantage, at least in the fundraising as of right now. But anything could change in the next couple of weeks before the June 25th primary.
So two things here. Basically, they went up against each other last year, but this was like sort of for like a jury of their peers versus they were not elected by the voters. So it's kind of a different situation now where they're appealing to voters versus appealing to other folks in the political sphere.
That's correct. Vacancy committees are generally made up of the party faithful, the people who are the most committed to party activism, that kind of thing. Party insiders. I mean, that's what it boils down to. These are party insiders who put Hernandez into that seat. The question becomes, what do the voters of House District 4, is Hernandez the guy they want to continue moving forward with, or do they want to go with Espinoza? And you couldn't see more dramatically different views of how these two people are running and who's backing them. You have lots of unions who are backing Hernandez, and there's a really good dividing line about this. The other groups who are backing Espinoza are people like the Colorado Medical Society and the medical insurance community, and these are people who back and organizations that back sort of traditional Democrats. And we see these dividing lines between who the unions are backing and who sort of these traditional organizations that back traditional Democrats. We see this throughout all of the primary, all the people who are running in the primaries, particularly on the Democratic side. It's the same in House District 6. It's in the same which is another Denver district. That's Elizabeth Epps and Sean Camacho. Junie Joseph, who's running for re-election in Boulder. We're seeing the same thing with her. And we're also seeing the same thing in House District 30, which is Lakewood, between Kira Degree Kennedy and Rebecca Stewart, who are both running for the first time. This is an open seat.
I want to shake this out a little more when you say a traditional Democratic candidate and then the sort of non-traditional candidate, which is the candidates that are being backed, like you're saying, by unions. Can we get a little bit more into like what these two sides look like of the Democratic Party?
Clearly, the union candidates are backing progressive candidates. These are the progressive Democrats who are running things like the assault weapons bill and safe site and certain eviction. Just cause for eviction bills and all that. This is most definitely the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, who are backing people like Hernandez and Epps and some of these other folks. And then people who are more aligned with the sort of traditional Democrats, sort of maybe even old school Democrats, who are backing the candidates on the other side. You could even say these are the moderate Democrats, perhaps, of the party.
Interesting. And I think that's what makes the primaries so much more interesting to me is like, someone who's voting Democratic actually has two choices that can be pretty different, even though they're representing the same party.
Absolutely. They're very different. You're going to see very different legislative priorities depending on who wins that primary. And the other thing to remember, of course, is whoever wins the primary wins the seat, because particularly in Denver, particularly in Boulder, and even in that Lakewood seat, the voter registration, despite the fact that unaffiliated voters lead in all of those districts, Democrats have a pretty commanding lead. I think in Epps's district, it's like 68, 70%. So it's whoever wins the primary wins the seat.
One other thing I want to touch on before we move on to the next race is you mentioned that both of these candidates, Tim Hernandez and Cecilia Espinoza, have controversies sort of attached to their names. Can you talk about each of those situations?
Sure. With Hernandez, obviously he's well known in the education community coming from the Denver public schools. He also gained a lot of attention over his allegiance to the pro-Palestinian movement. And that actually earned him some criticism, even from members of the House who told him to kind of tone it down a little bit. Now, the thing with Espinoza has to do with her taking some fundraising and having someone speak on her behalf that kind of irritated some folks in the Democratic caucus. And these were people who were aligned with the anti-trans movement.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And that caused quite a bit of controversy. And I believe, if I remember correctly, she actually returned the donations that she got from this anti-trans activist. And she said she supports transgender individuals, but she still wound up catching some criticism over that.
This is so interesting because we're also looking at a dichotomy of national politics by looking at these two candidates and say one of them has been in hot water for comments about the Israel-Hamas situation. One of them has been in hot water for aligning themselves potentially with the anti-trans stuff. So it's just so interesting that within the party, we're seeing such a difference in the candidates. We've spoken with Tim Hernandez about that situation, so we'll put a link in the show notes if folks are curious to hear more from him directly. This episode is brought to you by the Museum of Outdoor Arts. The summer comes alive with a dynamic lineup of events during the Museum of Outdoor Arts Marjorie Park Uncorked series, featuring live music and artful entertainment. The Sculpture Park also hosts candlelight concerts and Rock the Block, a special series of live community lunch shows. The Museum of Outdoor Arts has teamed up with pioneering immersive artist Lonnie Hansen to bring you his newest permanent installation, The Cabinet of Curiosities and Impossibilities, immersing viewers in historic artifact collections, one-of-a-kind art pieces, and wonders that will surprise and delight your imagination. Many events are free and open to anyone, and you're invited to bring your own picnic. For a full schedule of events and more information, visit moaonline.org/events. That's moaonline.org/events. This episode is brought to you by Central City Opera. Central City Opera's Summer Festival is almost here. Don't miss your opportunity to experience exceptional musical theater and opera in the intimate and historic 550-seat Central City Opera House just 35 miles west of Denver. This year, their summer festival includes Pirates of Penzance, Girl of the Golden West, and Street Scene. The Central City Opera Festival runs from June 29th to August 4th, with tickets starting at just $31, and they are going fast. You can find tickets and a performance schedule at centralcityopera.org/citycast. Book tickets by June 30th and use the code CITYCAST at checkout for 20% off all performances after July 18th. Again, book using the code CITYCAST at centralcityopera.org/citycast. Okay, let's move on to the next race. And you've mentioned this, but it's House District 6, Democratic incumbent Elizabeth Epps against Sean Camacho. What is the situation in this race?
This to me is the race to watch. Of all of the 25 primaries, 17 in the House and 8 in the Senate, this is the race to watch. This is the most fascinating race of all of them. Epps, of course, has been very, very controversial at the state capitol. She also aligns herself with the pro-Palestinian protesters and actually shut down the House during the special session last year when she went up in the gallery and they all made a lot of ruckus and caused a lot of trouble. She has been chastised and reprimanded by the Speaker of the House not once but twice for those activities. Now, the interesting thing about Representative Epps, and she's run a lot of very controversial bills, but she's also been pretty successful on some of the things that she's worked on. She was the sponsor on the Safe Site bill. She was the sponsor on the assault weapons bill. Both of them, this is the second year that she's run both of them, and she managed to get them out of the House this year, but they both died in the Senate. When you look at the race between her and Camacho, she actually didn't get into the race until fairly late. She filed her candidacy paperwork, which anybody can do. They can do the day after they're elected. They can file their candidacy paperwork for the next session. And she did that early on. But she didn't actually even show up to caucus and announce that she was going to try and get on the ballot through the caucus process until a day or two before. I mean, she really waited until very late to do that. And I kind of think her fundraising has kind of reflected that a little bit. She really has not raised a whole lot of money, given the challenge that she's facing from Sean Camacho, who is a military veteran, was a Republican until 5 years ago. He changed his party affiliation to independent and then registered as a Democrat after that. Camacho has gained something that I've never seen before, and I've never seen an incumbent who has earned this much animus from her own caucus. He's been endorsed by 22 current Democratic lawmakers, almost all of them in the House. These are Epps's colleagues, and they clearly do not want her back. That includes the majority leader of the House. This includes the state senator whose Senate district includes House District 6. And the Senate president has also endorsed Camacho. I've never seen this kind of endorsements going against an incumbent. This just doesn't happen. This doesn't happen.
I find this interesting, though, too, because Sean, like you said, Sean Camacho is a former Republican.
Yeah.
And it was in the last 5 years that he switched parties. And to me, this is such again, we're seeing a clear divide in the Democratic Party between progressives and moderates.
Absolutely. It's absolutely amazing to me. Every time I look on his website, he's gained a couple more lawmakers, the current lawmakers who are endorsing him, which that should tell you a lot about where Epps, how Epps is viewed by her own caucus. I mean, to me, it's just shocking. So I really think that this will be the most interesting race to watch on election night.
And you mentioned that the fundraising aspect of this. Colorado Newsline reported that Epps has raised about $35,000 and spent a bit over $9,000, while Camacho has brought in $125,000 and spent over $84,000. What does the money say to you in this race?
Pretty much the same thing that it said to me about House District 4. You've got the progressives and the unions who are backing Epps, and you've got a lot of other groups who back traditional Democrats or moderate Democrats who are backing Camacho. It'll be interesting to see whether money plays a role. But there's something else that's really interesting and a difference between House District 4 and House 6. House District 4, both candidates reflect that community pretty well. And I think it'll be interesting to see where the activists, if the activists can put Hernandez across the finish line. Epps has a lot of support among grassroots activists, but they don't live in House District 6. And to the point about her allegiance to pro-Palestinian protesters, her district has a substantial Jewish population. And believe me, they aren't happy. And I've talked to a lot of folks.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Heard, particularly when you get to the east side of the district, which goes all the way over to Windsor Gardens, which is almost on the Aurora City line.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, her district has kind of an odd shape. It includes Capitol Hill, the state capitol. It goes, all the way east, but then it dips down into Windsor Gardens and sort of that eastern Denver area. And there's a strong Jewish population in there. And in my conversations with them, with folks in the district, I'm not hearing anybody who says they're gung-ho for Epps. I'm not sure that there are enough activists in House District 6 to put her across the finish line.
Yeah, I just did. I don't know how I sort of missed that aspect, but I grew up not far from there, and I went to I'm Catholic, but I went to the Jewish Community Center, and I grew up in a pretty Jewish community, and so thinking about that in this particular moment, I can see being a real determining factor. But what I also see here is something I see Tim Hernandez talk about a lot, because again, like I said, I'm in his district, so I get a lot of his information in the mail. Is his fight is really money doesn't matter when we have people power, right? And that is often what we see is like if the grassroots can really get folks out to vote, it can push up against the moneyed opposition. So I see where this will make these races really interesting to watch is just turnout, just sheer turnout.
Oh yeah, and that will be the game. The name of the game when we get to June 25th is who is able to get their grassroots supporters out. And get their ballots turned in and show up at the polling places and et cetera.
So let's talk a little bit more about money. We're going to step back from these particular races and sort of just look at the state as a whole. There's a lot of money in many of these campaigns across the state. Can you talk about some of the races where you're seeing these like wildly different fundraising numbers?
You have Judy Amabile, for example, who's running in Senate District 18. This is the seat that's held by the current Senate President, Steve Fenberg. And she does have a primary opponent, but she's pretty much smoked that opponent in terms of both what she's been able to raise and what she has spent so far. She's raised $180,000 so far, and her opponent has raised about $22,000. And it's just, it's not a contest. This is an interesting district because it's West Boulder, and then it goes. It's primarily Boulder, but Amabile's the House district that she represented was West Boulder and parts of Jackson and Grant counties. So it was a little bit more rural. Now she's moving into a Senate district that is almost primarily just Boulder. So and she has been aligned with progressives in the House. So it'll be, the combination of her fundraising and her allegiances. I really don't think that this is going to be much of a contest.
Interesting. So that's a race where we might be seeing the money and the grassroots activism aligning and sort of becoming a superpower for one candidate. What else are you looking at?
The most interesting Senate race, I think, is probably going to be, well, there's actually two. One is a Democrat. This is Senate District 19. It's currently represented by Senator Rachel Zenzinger, who's now running for Jefferson County Commissioner. She's term limited this year. And her opponents are Lindsay Doherty, who's a current member of the House, and Obi Azadi, who is, I believe, a Westminster City councilman. This is probably the hottest Senate race among for the primaries. It's gotten kind of ugly, frankly. There's some push polls out there that are asking some pretty peculiar questions. So I think that's going to be an interesting race. The other one is actually in Colorado Springs, and this is an incumbent, Larry Liston, who has been in the legislature for quite a long time, has two primary opponents, including the husband of the current chair of the El Paso GOP. And he got into it with this guy. They got into a physical fight. And Liston, I believe, filed charges that got dismissed. And so Rex Tompkins, who is the husband of Vicky Tompkins, is now challenging Liston for his seat. Now, again, this is a situation where if money makes a difference, Larry Liston doesn't have a problem. He's fundraising very, very well. Both Tompkins and the other candidate, whose last name is Stiver, have not done well in fundraising. They have less than $5,000 apiece. So, and Larry's sitting on about $80,000. So he's got a pretty good advantage. But the question becomes, in this district, do traditional Republicans have the votes to put Larry Liston back in? Because he's a traditional Republican. Or are they going to pick Tompkins or Stiver, who come out of the MAGA wing of the party? So it'll be real interesting to see just how this one turns out. And then the last House seat that I'm watching really closely and find really fascinating is my own House District 30, which is Lakewood. The candidates, and these are Democrats in the primary, Kira DeGree Kennedy and Rebecca Stewart. And if the name DeGree Kennedy rings a bell, it should. This is the wife of the current Speaker Pro Tem of the House, Chris DeGree Kennedy, who is term limited this year. And he just announced that he's taking on a new job as the head of the Bell Policy Center. And he is going to finish out his term. So his wife is running to replace him. Rebecca Stewart is a Lakewood City Councilwoman. And again, this is another one where the fundraising is really going to make a difference. The Stewart has done considerably better, but the DeGree Kennedy name carries weight. So it'll be interesting to see which one of those folks picks up that seat. And again, it's between the progressives and the more traditional or moderate Democrats.
That's what I think makes primaries so interesting, is when you start to see the breakdowns within the parties of how, and right now, I mean, I think we can see some really polarizing situations, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, just very different ideologies within your own party.
It is. But the thing that's interesting to me is that the number of incumbents who are being challenged this year, I'm so interested to hear what you have to say, because we are looking at incumbents being challenged by folks in their own party. What is going on with the amount of incumbents that are being challenged? Like, what does that say to you about our political landscape? It says that the divisions within the Democratic Party right now, they might not be as toxic, but they're definitely as real. We've got 3 incumbents in the House who are being challenged. The third, which I didn't mention, is Mary Bradfield down in Colorado Springs. And she's had to deal with this 2 years in a row now, where she's faced challenges from her right flank. And then we've got 2 incumbents in the Senate, both Republicans, who are both being challenged from their right flank. It's just unusual to see this many incumbents being challenged for their seats, and for the Democrats in particular, that there are really some growing divisions in the party, more than we've ever seen before.
And I think that this is such an interesting thing to watch locally, because when the presidential election rolls around here pretty soon, we may be seeing some similar division. We're just seeing it early on reflected within, from a local point of view.
That's correct. Yeah.
Ooh. Well, Marianne, this has been great. I think you always give me a reason to push folks to vote in the primary, because sometimes we think, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just it's the pre-vote. But really, sometimes we're voting, and that will be the only person that ends up on the ballot in the fall.
That's absolutely correct. The primaries this year really matter, particularly since we have so many of them, so many House districts that are being challenged, so many Senate districts, almost anywhere along the front. And most of these are along the Front Range. In fact, I think almost all of them are either Front Range or Eastern Plains. So if you live in Denver, if you live on the Front Range, you live on the Eastern Plains, this is the year to really pay attention to what's on the ballot in the primary.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching. Ballots go out. So, Marianne, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I love talking to you, Bree. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell Sean Camacho about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya. Oh my God, it's already June. Jeez Louise.